The crowd erupted in cruel laughter as a young woman stepped forward to calm a horse that had broken 3 experienced handlers in less than an hour. But what happened next would silence every voice in that prestigious auction hall forever. The grand auction house buzzed with the quiet confidence of wealth and pedigree. Its polished wooden beams echoing with the murmur of seasoned buyers who measured worth in bloodlines and bank accounts. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over leather-bound catalogs and tailored jackets, while the scent of expensive cologne mingled with the earthier smell of hay and horse sweat drifting from the arena below. This was where champions were bought and sold, where fortunes changed hands with the subtle lift of a numbered paddle. But in the center ring stood something that didn't belong in this world of perfection. A chestnut mare. Her once magnificent coat, now dulled to the color of rust, trembled with a terror so profound it seemed to radiate from her very bones. Her ribs pressed sharp against skin that had known too little feed and too much fear, while her tangled mane hung limp and lifeless across a neck that flinched at every shadow. The white blaze down her face, which might once have been her most beautiful feature, now served only to highlight the wild panic burning in her dark eyes. The auctioneer, a man whose silver tongue had convinced millionaires to part with fortunes for lesser horses, struggled to maintain his composure as the mare reared again, her hooves striking the air with desperate fury. 2 handlers flanked her at a careful distance, their faces grim with the knowledge that this animal was beyond their considerable skills. She wasn't just afraid she was shattered, a creature whose spirit had been broken so thoroughly that even standing in the ring seemed to cause her physical pain. Whispers rippled through the crowd, like poison through water. Worthless, they murmured. Dangerous. A liability waiting to happen. Some laughed outright at the spectacle, their amusement sharp and cutting as they watched what had once been a creature of grace and power, reduced to this trembling shadow of fear. The bidding started at an insulting $50, then dropped even lower as potential buyers shook their heads and turned away in disgust. This mare represented everything the elite horse world despised: damaged goods with no pedigree to excuse her flaws, no bloodline to promise future glory. She was the kind of mistake that serious buyers wouldn't waste their time on, a reminder that not every horse could be saved, and not every story had a happy ending. The auctioneer's voice grew more desperate with each failed attempt to generate interest, his professional pride crumbling as the magnificent venue filled with the uncomfortable silence of collective rejection. Yet something about this broken creature radiated a truth that the glittering crowd couldn't see, a spark buried so deep beneath layers of trauma that it would take someone extraordinary to recognize it. In their haste to judge by appearances, they had missed the most important detail of all. This mare wasn't broken beyond repair. She was simply waiting for someone who understood that the deepest wounds often hide the strongest hearts. The moment a young woman in faded jeans raised her hand to bid on the terrified mare, the entire auction hall fell into a stunned silence that would transform into something far more dangerous than mockery. From the shadows of the back row, where folding chairs had been set up for overflow guests who couldn't afford the premium seating, a slender hand rose with quiet determination. Emma Chen stood slowly, her worn flannel shirt and scuffed boots marking her as an outsider in this world of polished leather and pristine designer wear. At 24, she carried herself with the careful posture of someone who had learned to make herself small, to avoid drawing attention. Yet here she was, stepping directly into the spotlight of hundreds of judgmental eyes. The auctioneer paused mid-sentence, his silver tongue momentarily failing him as he processed this unexpected development. His practiced gaze swept over Emma's modest appearance, taking in the frayed edges of her shirt sleeves and the honest dirt under her fingernails that spoke of real work rather than manicured leisure. This wasn't the kind of buyer he was accustomed to dealing with in venues like this, where serious money moved with the subtlety of raised eyebrows and barely perceptible nods. A ripple of amusement began in the front rows, spreading backward like a wave of shared superiority. Heads turned to get a better look at this young woman who had clearly wandered into the wrong auction. Some buyers smiled with the kind of condescending patience reserved for children who didn't understand adult conversations, while others shook their heads in open disbelief. The idea that this slip of a girl could afford even the pathetically low asking price seemed absurd to people who measured worth in zeros and commas. The laughter started as isolated chuckles, but quickly gained momentum, feeding on itself until it filled the vast space with the sharp sound of collective derision. These were people who had spent fortunes on horses, who understood bloodlines and breeding programs, who could spot quality from across a ring. What could this clearly inexperienced young woman possibly know about horses that they didn't? The very suggestion that she might be a serious bidder struck them as genuinely amusing. Emma remained standing, her hands still raised, seemingly oblivious to the growing wave of mockery washing over her. There was something in her stillness that spoke of deep waters running beneath a calm surface, a quality that the laughing crowd was too caught up in their own amusement to notice. Her dark eyes never left the trembling mare in the center ring, and for those few observers paying attention, there was an intensity in her gaze that suggested she saw something the rest of them had missed. The auctioneer cleared his throat, his professional instincts warring with his incredulity. Rules were rules, and technically, any registered attendee could bid. But the sheer incongruity of the situation left him momentarily paralyzed. This girl looked like she could barely afford the gas money to drive to the auction, let alone purchase a horse that would require thousands in rehabilitation costs, even at bargain prices. Yet something about Emma's unwavering focus on the terrified mare suggested this wasn't a mistake or a moment of naive impulse. In the growing chaos of laughter and whispered commentary, she stood like a pillar of quiet certainty, waiting for the mockery to die down so she could do what she had come here to do. The moment Emma Chen stepped into that arena, she crossed an invisible threshold where impossible things become inevitable. Though no one in that mocking crowd could have predicted what would unfold in the sacred space between broken souls, the laughter swelled to a crescendo as Emma moved with deliberate slowness toward the center ring. Each step measured and purposeful, despite the cacophony of derision surrounding her. The wealthy buyers leaned forward in their seats, anticipating the spectacle of watching an inexperienced girl get trampled by a horse that had already sent 3 professional handlers scrambling for safety. Their amusement was sharp and cruel, the kind of entertainment that came from watching someone else's inevitable failure from the comfortable distance of superiority. The Chestnut Mare's terror intensified at Emma's approach, her already frantic movements becoming explosive. As another human dared to enter her space, she reared high, striking the air with hooves that could crush bone, her eyes rolling white with panic that seemed to emanate from the very core of her being. The handlers tensed, ready to intervene, while the crowd held its collective breath in anticipation of disaster. But Emma didn't flinch. Something extraordinary happened in that moment of supreme chaos. She became perfectly still, her entire body radiating a calm so profound it seemed to create its own gravitational field. She didn't speak, didn't make sudden movements, or attempt to grab at the lead rope swinging wildly from the mare's halter. Instead, she simply existed in that space, her presence becoming an anchor point in the storm of the horse's terror. The transformation was so gradual that many in the crowd missed its beginning. The mare's frantic rearing began to lose its desperation, her striking hooves finding a different rhythm. Her breathing, which had been sharp and panicked, started to slow. Emma stood just outside the range of those dangerous hooves, her own breathing deep and measured, as if she were offering the horse a template for peace. The laughter died first in scattered whispers, then spread like reverse wildfire through the auction hall. As people began to realize something unprecedented was occurring, the mayor's wild eyes began to focus, not with the blank terror of a trapped animal, but with a recognition that seemed to pierce through layers of trauma, to find something deeper. Her neck, which had been rigid with fear, began to soften. Emma extended one hand, palm up, making no move to touch or control. She simply offered her presence, patient as stone, steady as earth. The mare took a tentative step forward, then another, drawn by something in this young woman that spoke to the part of herself that remembered what trust felt like before the world had taught her to fear every human hand. In the growing silence of the auction hall, broken only by the soft sound of hooves on sawdust, something sacred was being rebuilt, not through force or expertise or expensive equipment, but through the simple recognition that healing happens when one wounded soul sees itself reflected in another. The crowd watched, transfixed, as their assumptions crumbled and something far more powerful than money or pedigree filled the space where mockery had been moments before. The mare stretched her neck forward, her muzzle barely brushing Emma's outstretched palm, and in that whisper-soft touch, everything changed. The whispers that began circulating through the auction hall carried the weight of buried secrets as two names from the past converged in a moment that would force the horse world to confront the tragedies it preferred to forget. As Emma completed the purchase with a quiet efficiency that surprised even the auctioneer, the crowd's stunned silence gradually gave way to urgent murmurs of recognition. In the front rows where the most seasoned buyers sat, weathered faces creased with the effort of memory, as pieces of a puzzle 3 years in the making finally began to fall into place. The girl who had just accomplished the impossible wasn't just any young woman, she was Emma Chen, once heralded as the most promising young rider of her generation. The whispers spread like ripples across still water, carrying fragments of a story that had dominated headlines before mysteriously vanishing from public consciousness. Emma Chen, the prodigy who had swept junior competitions with a grace that seemed almost supernatural. Emma Chen, who had been chosen for the Olympic development program at just 21. Emma Chen, who had disappeared from competition overnight, leaving behind only speculation and a silence so complete it had eventually been forgotten by all but those who remembered what she might have become. But it was an elderly man in the third row, his hands gnarled from decades of handling horses, who provided the missing piece that made the entire picture crystallize into something far more profound than coincidence. His voice carried clearly in the hushed hall as recognition dawned on his weathered features. The mare, he whispered to his companion, bore an uncanny resemblance to Copper Canyon, a filly who had shown extraordinary promise on the racing circuit before vanishing under circumstances that had never been fully explained. The connection sent a chill through those who remembered both stories. Copper Canyon had been more than just another promising racehorse. She had been a phenomenon, a filly whose heart and speed had captured the imagination of everyone who watched her run. Her disappearance had coincided almost exactly with Emma's withdrawal from competition, though no official connection had ever been drawn between the two events. Now watching Emma's gentle hands stroke the neck of a mare who bore the same distinctive white blaze and chestnut coloring as the lost racing star, the coincidence seemed far too precise to be accidental. The horse's terrified demeanor made sense. Now if this truly was Copper Canyon, something terrible had happened to transform a confident young racehorse into the traumatized creature they had just witnessed. The crowd began to murmur with a different energy now, no longer dismissive, but genuinely unsettled by the implications of what they were seeing. Two rising stars from different disciplines, both vanished at the same time, both bearing invisible scars that spoke of shared trauma. The way Emma moved around the mare suggested not just skill but intimate familiarity, as if she were reuniting with an old friend rather than calming a strange horse. As Emma led the mare toward the exit, ignoring the curious stares and whispered speculation following her every step, one truth became undeniably clear. This wasn't just a rescue purchase or an act of impulse generosity. This was something far more complex and profound, a reckoning with a past that had been buried but never truly forgotten, and a reunion between two souls who had survived something the horse world had apparently conspired to keep hidden. The auction continued, but nobody was paying attention to the remaining lots anymore. They were all watching Emma Chen walk away with what might be the most important horse of her life, wondering what secrets would finally surface when the truth could no longer be contained. The trailer door closed with a finality that sealed both woman and horse into a moving sanctuary where 3 years of carefully buried pain would have nowhere left to hide. Emma's hands trembled as she secured the latch, the metallic click echoing with the weight of decisions that couldn't be undone. Behind her, the auction crowd continued their whispered speculation, but their voices seemed to come from another world entirely, muffled by the thick glass of trauma that separated her present from the life she had once known. The modest two-horse trailer, with its dented aluminum sides and rust-stained wheel wells, stood in stark contrast to the gleaming custom rigs that surrounded it. But Emma barely noticed the disparity anymore. Inside the confined space, the mare she had just claimed moved with the restless energy of barely contained terror. Each shift of weight sent vibrations through the trailer's frame, a rhythmic reminder that healing never followed straight lines or convenient timelines. Emma pressed her palm against the warm metal, feeling the horse's distress transfer through steel and into her own nervous system. Like an electric current, they were connected now, bound by something deeper than ownership papers or auction receipts. The drive away from the auction house began in deceptive calm, but within miles the mare's anxiety manifested in increasingly dangerous ways. The trailer swayed as powerful hooves struck against the walls, each impact reverberating through Emma's chest like a physical blow. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white against the worn leather, fighting the urge to pull over and abandon this impossible undertaking before it destroyed them both. But stopping wasn't an option, because Emma understood with crystalline clarity that the horse's panic was merely an echo of her own carefully suppressed terror. 3 years of self-imposed exile had taught her to recognize the symptoms of trauma in all its subtle manifestations, and she could feel her own ghost stirring in response to the mare's distress. The rhythmic pounding from the trailer matched the frantic beating of her heart, a percussion section in a symphony of shared suffering that threatened to overwhelm them both. The winding country roads stretched endlessly before them, each curve and hill presenting new challenges as the trailer's occupant fought against confinement with the desperation of something that had learned imprisonment meant death. Emma's eyes darted constantly between the road ahead and the rearview mirror, watching for signs that the situation was spiraling beyond her ability to control. Her breath came in short, measured intervals, the same careful pattern she had learned during months of therapy when panic attacks made normal existence impossible. Miles passed in this delicate dance between control and chaos, with Emma murmuring soft reassurances that she hoped would penetrate the trailer's walls and reach the terrified soul within. She spoke of home and safety, of wide pastures and gentle mornings, painting word pictures of a future that felt impossibly distant from their current reality. Whether the horse could hear her or understand, Emma couldn't know, but the act of speaking these hopes aloud helped steady her own fractured nerves. As familiar landmarks began appearing along the roadside, Emma felt something shift in the quality of the mare's movements. The violent thrashing gradually gave way to a different kind of restlessness, as if some primal part of the horse recognized that they were approaching sanctuary rather than another form of captivity. It was the first sign that perhaps against all odds, they might both survive this journey back to a place where healing could finally begin. The moment Emma opened that trailer door and watched the broken mare take her first tentative steps onto sacred ground, she unknowingly began the most important healing journey of both their lives, though neither could have imagined the darkness they would have to navigate before finding light. Emma's farm stretched across 40 modest acres of rolling pasture, bordered by weathered wooden fences that had stood sentinel through decades of seasons. The barn, with its faded red paint and creaking doors, bore the honest scars of time and weather, but it radiated the kind of peace that only comes from places where suffering has been transformed into sanctuary. This was where Emma had retreated 3 years ago, choosing isolation over the spotlight that had once defined her existence, trading acclaim for the quiet work of mending what the world had deemed irreparable. The mare, whom Emma christened Hope, in a moment of desperate optimism, emerged from the trailer like a ghost materializing from shadow. Her steps were measured and careful, each movement telegraphing the hypervigilance of something that had learned to expect pain from every interaction. Hope's ribs pressed sharply against her dull coat, testament to months of neglect that went far deeper than simple malnutrition. Her eyes darted constantly, cataloging every potential threat in an environment her nervous system couldn't yet accept as safe. The first weeks unfolded in a delicate dance of approach and retreat, with Emma moving through Hope's world like morning mist, patient, persistent, but never overwhelming. She began each day by simply existing in the mare's presence, sitting quietly in the pasture while Hope grazed at the furthest possible distance, their proximity measured in careful meters that gradually, imperceptibly, began to shrink. Emma understood that trust couldn't be commanded or coerced. It had to be offered freely, received willingly, and nurtured with the kind of consistency that only comes from someone who knows intimately what betrayal costs. Every small breakthrough carried the weight of monumental victory. The first time Hope approached the fence line, while Emma stood nearby, the first tentative touch of velvet muzzle against outstretched palm, the first moment the mare didn't flinch when Emma moved too quickly. All were celebrations worthy of tears that Emma shed privately in the sanctuary of her farmhouse kitchen. But each victory was inevitably followed by crushing setbacks, days when some invisible trigger would send Hope spiraling back into the depths of terror, undoing weeks of careful progress in a single explosive moment of panic. Emma recognized the pattern because she lived it herself. The way certain sounds could transport Hope back to whatever hell she had escaped mirrored Emma's own struggle with unexpected triggers that could reduce her to a trembling shadow of the confident woman she had once been. Thunder sent them both seeking shelter, but for different reasons. Raised voices, even in laughter, made Hope bolt and Emma's chest tighten with familiar anxiety. They were learning to navigate their shared landscape of invisible landmines, each helping the other recognize the early warning signs of approaching storms. The rehabilitation techniques Emma employed blended everything she had learned from years of classical training with the hard-won wisdom of someone who understood that healing happens in the spaces between heartbeats, in the quiet moments when guard drops and connection becomes possible. She spoke to Hope in the language of patience, of presence, of showing up day after day regardless of whether progress was visible or setbacks seemed insurmountable. Slowly, microscopic moment by microscopic moment, something profound began to shift between them. The carefully constructed walls of Emma's sanctuary began to crumble the moment word spread through the horse community that the girl who had vanished was not only alive, but working miracles with a mare that defied every conventional wisdom about broken animals. The first visitors arrived on a Tuesday morning when the autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves and distant possibility. Emma watched from the kitchen window as familiar vehicles turned down her gravel driveway, their polished surfaces reflecting a world she had deliberately left behind. These weren't casual curiosity seekers, they were people from her former life, drawn by whispers that had grown too loud to ignore. The horse community was small and tightly woven, where news traveled faster than gossip and legends never truly died. Sarah Martinez emerged from the first car, her movements carrying the same precise confidence that had made her one of the most sought-after riding instructors on the East Coast. Behind her came others' faces, Emma recognized from competitions, training facilities and the golden days when her future had seemed limitless. They approached with the careful hesitation of people entering sacred space, their expressions mixing curiosity with something deeper, more complex. But it was the arrival of Marcus Webb that sent Emma's carefully maintained composure into freefall. Her former trainer stepped out of his familiar silver truck with the same measured grace that had guided her through countless training sessions, his weathered face bearing new lines that spoke of years spent carrying burdens she had left him to shoulder alone. The sight of him triggered a cascade of memories so vivid they threatened to pull her back into the darkness she had fought so hard to escape. Marcus's eyes found hers across the distance of the farmyard, and in that moment of connection, the carefully constructed narrative Emma had built around her exile began to dissolve. He knew things about that final day that no one else understood, secrets that had shaped every decision she had made since fleeing the competitive world that had once defined her existence. His presence here meant the truth could no longer remain buried beneath years of careful silence. As the group gathered near Hope's pasture, their professional assessment of the mare's condition was immediate and undeniable. This was indeed the horse many of them remembered as Copper Canyon, though transformed beyond recognition by trauma that mirrored Emma's own journey through hell. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Both had been rising stars, whose worlds had shattered in moments of betrayal that left them unable to trust the very systems that had once celebrated their potential. Marcus approached the fence line, where Hope grazed, his experienced eye cataloging every detail of the mare's transformation, the way she moved with cautious confidence, the gradual return of muscle definition beneath her coat. The alert yet calm expression that suggested healing was taking root in soil that had once seemed permanently barren. His assessment was thorough and professional, but his glances toward Emma carried the weight of unspoken understanding. The truth hung in the air between them, like morning mist, ready to burn away under the intensity of direct sunlight. Emma's hands trembled as she realized that the sanctuary she had built, the careful distance she had maintained from her past, was about to be stripped away by the very people who had once shared her dreams. Hope lifted her head from grazing, sensing the tension that crackled through the autumn air, and in her dark eyes, Emma saw a reflection of her own fear, that safety was always temporary, that peace was just another word for the calm before the inevitable storm. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and there was nowhere left to run. The moment Emma held the exhibition flyer in her trembling hands, she realized that true healing would demand the one thing she and Hope had spent 3 years avoiding: the courage to step back into the very arena where their worlds had first shattered. The cream-colored paper felt heavier than it should have, its elegant lettering announcing the Autumn Classic Horse Show's new exhibition class for rescue horses. The words seemed to shimmer and blur as Emma read them, her vision clouded by the sudden rush of memories that threatened to drag her back into the darkness she had fought so desperately to escape. This wasn't just an invitation, it was a challenge that cut straight to the core of everything she had been running from. Hope sensed the shift in Emma's energy immediately, lifting her head from the sweet autumn grass with the hyper-awareness that had become second nature to them both. The mare's dark eyes studied Emma's face with an intelligence that sometimes felt almost supernatural, as if she could read the storm clouds gathering in her human's heart. Their connection had deepened beyond the simple bond between horse and rider, into something more profound, a shared understanding born from walking parallel paths through trauma and tentative healing. The exhibition class represented everything Emma had convinced herself they didn't need. For 3 years she had built their sanctuary on the foundation that safety meant isolation, that healing happened in the quiet spaces away from judgment and expectation. Their progress had been measured in microscopic victories, private moments when Hope's ears pricked forward with curiosity instead of fear, when Emma could breathe deeply without the crushing weight of anxiety settling in her chest. But now, staring at that innocent piece of paper, Emma was forced to confront a truth she had been avoiding. The safety they had created was also a prison, beautiful and peaceful, but bounded by invisible walls of fear that kept them forever looking backward instead of forward. Hope had regained her physical strength, her coat now gleaming with health, her movements flowing with the natural grace that spoke of her champion bloodline. Yet neither of them had truly tested whether their healing could withstand the pressures of the world beyond their carefully controlled environment. The horse show represented every nightmare that haunted Emma's sleep: crowds of people whose opinions could cut like knives, the electric tension of competition that could transform familiar spaces into battlegrounds, the terrifying possibility that all their progress could evaporate under the harsh lights of public scrutiny. She imagined Hope's reaction to the chaos, the noise, the press of unfamiliar humans, and her stomach clenched with protective anxiety. Yet beneath the fear ran a current of something else, a whispered recognition that this might be exactly what they both needed. Not to prove anything to the world that had hurt them, but to prove to themselves that they were no longer the broken creatures who had limped away from their former lives. The exhibition wasn't about winning ribbons or earning applause. It was about the fundamental question of whether healing meant hiding, or whether it meant having the courage to trust their own transformation. Emma's fingers traced Hope's neck as she wrestled with the decision, feeling the steady rhythm of the mare's heartbeat beneath her palm. In that simple contact, she found her answer not in words or logic, but in the profound understanding that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was choosing to move forward, despite terror's presence. The exhibition represented their chance to discover not just how far they had come, but how much further they were capable of going together. The application deadline was 3 days away. The moment Emma and Hope entered that arena, 3 years of whispered doubts and cruel laughter died in the throat of every person who had ever believed that broken meant beyond repair. The autumn sun filtered through the show arena's windows, casting golden streams of light across the sandy footing where Emma and Hope stood at the gate. The familiar sounds of a horse show buzzed around them, the rustle of programs, the distant whinny of horses, the low murmur of conversations that carried the weight of expectation and judgment. But something had shifted in the quality of the silence that greeted their entrance. This wasn't the mocking quiet of 3 years ago, but something deeper, more reverent, as if the crowd sensed they were about to witness something that transcended ribbons and rankings. Hope's transformation was undeniable. Where once a terrified skeletal mare had trembled in an auction ring, now stood a horse whose very presence commanded respect. Her chestnut coat gleamed with the rich depth of burnished copper, each muscle defined beneath skin that spoke of careful nutrition and patient conditioning. But it was her eyes that told the true story, no longer wild with panic. They held the calm confidence of an animal who had learned to trust not just her human but herself. Emma's own transformation was equally profound, though perhaps less visible to those who had never known her before. The frightened girl who had fled the competitive world had been replaced by a woman whose quiet strength emanated from deep wells of hard-won wisdom. She moved with Hope as if they shared the same nervous system, their communication flowing through channels that went far beyond physical cues into the realm of pure understanding. As they began their demonstration, the arena fell into the kind of silence that only accompanies moments of genuine beauty. This wasn't a performance designed to impress judges or win prizes. It was a conversation between two souls who had found their way back to wholeness through each other. Every movement flowed from trust rather than dominance, from partnership rather than control. Hope responded to Emma's subtle requests, not out of submission, but from the joyful recognition that they were creating something beautiful together. The crowd watched, transfixed, as horse and rider moved through patterns that spoke of months of patient rebuilding, of setbacks overcome and fears conquered together. There were no dramatic flourishes or technically demanding maneuvers, just the profound grace of two beings who had learned that healing was possible, that brokenness was not a permanent condition, and that the most beautiful partnerships often emerged from shared understanding of pain. When they finally came to a halt in the center of the arena, the silence stretched for a heartbeat longer before erupting into applause that carried the weight of recognition rather than mere appreciation. In that moment, everyone present understood they had witnessed something far more valuable than any competition. Victory. They had seen a demonstration that transformation was always possible, that every broken heart contained the seeds of something beautiful, and that sometimes the greatest courage was simply the willingness to trust again. Emma's gentle hand on Hope's neck spoke of promises kept and futures reclaimed, while Hope's calm acceptance of the crowd's admiration showed a spirit that had not just survived trauma, but had been transformed by it into something even more magnificent than before. Thank you for watching this incredible story of healing and hope. If this touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more inspiring tales of transformation. I'll see you in the next video, where we'll explore another remarkable journey of resilience and redemption.